Russian attacks decreased in all sectors of the front line, and their gains were the smallest in the past 6 months. But the biggest news of this past week was the Ukrainian counterattacks in the Pokrovsk sector. Which followed their counterattack in Kursk from the week before. Ukrainian expert Sergei Gurets described it as the most difficult area in terms of the number of clashes. From Andriivka, Dachne, Kotliny in the west to Vozdivizhenka and Baranivka in the east. In his summary of the situation around Pokrovsk, he described it as follows. The arc spans about 45 kilometers along the contact line. In this area, Russia has 2 armies and 1 division, but it is notable that Russia's advance has significantly slowed in recent weeks. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces are now carrying out counterattacks in several directions, primarily targeting the flanks. In the past, Russian troops often surrounded Ukrainian settlements from the flanks, which became a signature tactic of the Russian army. Now, however, the Ukrainian armed forces are focusing their counterattacks on the western and eastern flanks. Also of note is the Russian advances in the post-Kurakhove sector, particularly in the village of Andriivka, which serves as a main stronghold holding back the Russians from closing the pocket formed west of Kurakhove. Both Ukrainian and Russian sources admit that recent Russian advances in this village put the entire village in jeopardy. Should it completely fall, many Ukrainian soldiers could become trapped. So today is a frontline update for the week of the 5th to the 12th of February. I will cover the post-Kurakhove front as well as the Pokrovsk front, which has seen the most combat activity in this past week. I have already done videos on the Kursk counterattacks and the capture of Toretsk that you can refer to for updates on those fronts. Now briefly, this channel is rapidly approaching the 1,000 subscriber mark and is hovering at around 2,000 watch hours thus far from this past week. At 3,000 watch hours, I will be able to enable fan funding, which will provide some sustenance on my research and work until I get the 4,000 watch hours to enable full monetization. I plan to resume my channel membership from the old channel here, this time with 1 level of membership where you will get access to everything. I do hope you will support me in that regard when I do. But for now, enjoy this video and let's get into it. For the past 3 weeks, Russian forces have tried to infiltrate Andriivka, a key point in the Ukrainian defense in this sector. Gradually, they managed to seize many houses in the eastern and central parts of the village, and in recent days expanded their control even further. Although they failed to break through head-on from the side of Shevchenko along the Volcha River, they managed to bypass the village from the north, from the direction of Petropavlivka and Slovianka. Ukrainian sources claim that the village is not lost yet and that fierce battles are ongoing, but they do admit that the trends are negative and could have tactical consequences that threaten the entire post-Kurakhove salient, which is holding defense well in other sectors. While this may not be completely false, most independent sources report that recent Russian advances have given them most of the village of Andriivka, to the extent that it is safe to say that Andriivka is either in the grey zone or fully under Russian control. For 3 weeks, Russian troops made several attempts to dislodge the Ukrainian defense forces from Dachne, despite occupying part of the village. They are also pushing from the south to cut off the Dachne-Ulakli road. As of today, the Russians have made new advances south and southwest of Dachne, according to Suryak maps. A video emanated showing 6 Ukrainian soldiers surrendering to the southern group of the Russian armed forces. The fiercest battles are currently in Zelenivka, where the Ukrainian armed forces claim to have recently expelled Russian troops. Now they say the Russian soldiers are trying to regain their positions, as Zelenivka could serve as a gateway for an advance on Ulakli and Konstantinivka. Russian movement towards the Dnipro region has slowed near Dachne and Ostenivka. The only progress they have made is advancing about 1 kilometer from Sibiny to the village of Zaporizhia. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces have claimed to have pushed them back on the stretch from Novosilka to Andriivka, so Russian troops are now trying to bypass Ukrainian defenses from the south and move towards Preobrazhenka, aiming to strike at the flanks of Zaporizhia and Andriivka villages. Heavy fighting continues for all these villages, but the Ukrainian defense forces are not giving Russian soldiers a chance to break through quickly. As a result, Russian troops are unable to secure their flank for the bypass of Pokrovsk and cannot send reinforcements, which are currently engaged in battles in the Novopavlivka and post-Kurakhove sectors. Now, for the third consecutive week, Russian forces have made less comparative progress near Pokrovsk. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defense forces have taken an initiative, launching systematic counterattacks on previously captured positions. This, they say, has halved the number of Russian offensives, dropping from 450 to 250. On the right flank near Vozdivizhenka, however, Russian forces had success as they managed to reach the Pokrovsk-Konstantinivka highway and secured positions around a major road junction where active battles are ongoing. Additionally, they continued their parallel movement toward the highway from the nearly occupied Baranivka. However, the Ukrainian defense forces repelled attempts to seize Andriivka and for now stopped the Russian advance in this direction. Several other attempts to capture Yelizavetovka were also repelled. One claimed success for the Ukrainian armed forces was an advance towards Dachne, a village located on the road from Selidove to Pokrovsk, the shortest route to the city. Some Ukrainian sources claimed that they have retaken it. There is also a claim that, recently, in Selidove, Ukrainian artillery succeeded in eliminating the command of the 35th Motorized Rifle Battalion, which they say likely influenced the further development of events in this area. However, the greatest success for the Ukrainian defense forces, including the 425th Separate Assault Regiment Skala, was the operation to retake Pishani. This was confirmed by independent sources who specified that the Ukrainian armed forces advanced from positions in the Pishani industrial zone, panning out into the residential areas, clearing Russian positions in the village. They also captured the forest plantation west of the village and are now reportedly attacking towards Pokrovsk. This can threaten the Russian encirclement of formations in and around Virove and Leontovichi. All the counterattacks show the intention of the Ukrainian command to cut off the Russian left flank protrusion and disrupt their attempts to bypass Pokrovsk from the west. The Solona River and its tributary, Solonenka, could become a natural barrier for pushing back Russian troops. Over the past 3 weeks, Ukrainian forces claim to have managed to hold back Russian advances in Shevchenko and Kotliny. The claim for Kotliny appears to have some merit, as independent sources confirm that Ukrainian forces had control of the entirety of the southern street of the village. Whether this recent, small-scale success for Ukraine is evidence of any Russian exhaustion or simply a temporary advance will be left to be seen. The further development of events will show how much reserve the Russian forces have for a breakthrough on the Pokrovsk front. Now, quite interestingly, Sergei Gurets, the Ukrainian expert, commented on the recent fortifications built by the Ukrainian armed forces in and around Pokrovsk.
Вот тут в конце полки ягоза получается, там проход есть. Сейчас еще тут срежем, чтобы 2 прохода было.
In this infographic, the white lines are what Ukraine managed to build in January. The lines go west of Pokrovsk. There are also lines from west to east towards Konstantinivka. there are anti-tank strips and other fortifications. This is in addition to the fortifications that have already been built in front of Pokrovsk and were built earlier. In particular, in the south, the fighting is now taking place along the third line, and these white lines, which are already behind Pokrovsk, were built quite quickly. And another extremely interesting detail is that satellites with synthesized equipment, i.e. satellites with radar, record another detail of the fortifications, the active use of barbed wire by the Ukrainian armed forces, or rather, a special mesh called Igoza. In many areas, the Ukrainian side has begun to actively use barbed wire to significantly hinder the advance of Russian infantry, which is now advancing in foot groups without armored vehicles. Barbed wire significantly delays their advance, he says. By the way, the activity of deploying this barbed wire is visible from satellite systems. It is hard to say why this has not been done before, but Mr. Guret's comments that we can see that this trend is becoming so noticeable even from satellites. In general, he says, we can say that fortifications are important, becoming more complex and aimed at maximizing the Russian army's depletion, which is an important element of Ukraine's defense system. Fortifications are now being built much more actively and can be seen from space. Vitaly Litvin, commander of an artillery reconnaissance division of a separate artillery brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine from the Pokrovsk direction, said that the number of Russian artillery attacks has not decreased, and that mortars, cannon artillery, and tactical aviation are still being used. Interaction between Ukrainian units is now very fast with the help of situational awareness and a large number of UAVs. If we take the operational brigade of the offensive guard with the NGU, he claims it can destroy up to 30 Russian mortar systems in a month with its own means alone. But the Russians do not abandon their intentions to advance in the Pokrovsk direction, and after the destruction of their mortars, new Russian formations appear. The situation is the same with cannon artillery. If a Russian cannon gets destroyed, a new one appears. The division commander added that Russian FPV drones on fiber optics, which are very effective, pose a threat to logistic routes on the Pokrovsk direction. Countering such Russian drones requires a comprehensive approach. First, we need to identify the crews of these UAVs and destroy their personnel and drone operators. Secondly, we need to improve fortifications, install anti-cumulative drills on equipment, and of course, the vigilance of every soldier. Many infantry units even conduct shootings with smoothbore rifles, which are called last chance, meaning that you understand that if you don't shoot down the drone in front of you, it will kill you. The serviceman noted that the intensity of Russian infantry assaults decreased a few days ago, but in some areas the Russian activity does not increase, the direction of Pishani and Vozdivizenka, where they want to capture Pokrovsk, and Munograd are of particular importance. And the number of Russian assault actions decreases somewhere. They cover it with increased artillery shelling and the use of tactical aviation to continue to exhaust the Ukrainian defenses in this area. Litvin noted that 3 to 4 months ago, Russian troops were advancing more actively with an ammunition ratio of 1 to 4, 1 to 5, and sometimes even 1 to 7. Today, this ratio is leveling off a bit, he says, but they also have a large number of artillery systems that were still manufactured in the Soviet Union. In addition, it is known that the Russian army also uses North Korean-made ammunition in order not to lose the intensity of assault operations and strike at Pokrovsk, logistic routes, and the front line of the Ukrainian defense. Now lastly, I will just talk briefly about the Velyka Novosilka front, where the Russians have recently resumed their northward advance. Recently, a prolonged pause ended following the withdrawal of Ukrainian forces from Velyka Novosilka. The Ukrainian Defense Forces held the settlement for a long time, preventing Russian troops from advancing north. However, unable to cross the Mory-Yali and Kasalak rivers, Russian troops bypassed them and advanced north from Andriivka. Simultaneously, they crossed the Velyka Novosilka Kuliapol Road in several places. The Russians have moved closer to the village of Novosilka, where a battle is expected to begin soon.